Welcome to Growth and Diversity, where we delve into the stories of leaders shaping the insurance industry with their unique perspectives and diverse backgrounds. Today, we are honored to have Chad Caples, who is head of talent acquisition at Genworth. Chad, welcome to Growth and Diversity. We're so excited to have you today. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Shawn. I appreciate the invitation. It's going to be great. Looking forward to it.
This was a little brainchild, I think, of you and I having dinner together when you were here for a conference last fall. So I'm glad it came together.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too.
It's good to see you again. It was more fun when we were having dinner together, but we'll make this work.
Sounds good.
Well, Chad, this is exciting for me for multiple reasons. One, being a little bit of a Genworth alum, and then you and I think, built a great relationship there. Loved working with you and your team. But you're also the first talent acquisition leader that we've had on our podcast. And so I wanted to make sure that you have a chance to introduce yourself, and I'd love you to just kind of tell the folks who you are, kind of your career experience, and give a little review from that standpoint. And then we'll go into a little bit of the Genworth Care Scout story after that.
Super. Yeah. Thanks again, Shawn, for the invitation. I appreciate it. So I've been in the recruiting or talent acquisition space for about 21 years. So it's been a long journey. Started out here in Richmond, Virginia, where I am, with what I would call probably a pretty traditional search firm, local regional model. Worked with them for 2 or 3 years, and then ended up transitioning in-house to what was then SunTrust Bank, now Truist Bank. And
Okay.
At the time, SunTrust had a pretty large footprint from Maryland down through Florida. And their headquarters for the bank was in Atlanta, but the headquarters for the mortgage company was actually here in Richmond. So they had a large recruiting presence here as well.
Sure.
And so they were really probably one of my strongest clients in the search firm days, and that allowed for a pretty smooth transition over to them in-house. And because of their presence here, it really was a great opportunity for me to kind of cut my teeth on a lot of different roles at a lot of different levels, just again because of their presence here locally. Was with them for a handful of years, and then was introduced to the then TA leader here at Genworth, and a short while later moseyed on over to Genworth, and I've been here almost 16 years, and been in leadership positions, player coach type roles most of that time, and then had the opportunity to outright lead the TA function now for about the last 4 or 5 years.
Gotcha. And I know those familiar definitely with the Genworth story. It was interesting when I was there for 3 years working with you and your team, and we were kind of building this new world. And honestly, it was one of the best 3 years sections of my career. Like I always tell folks, like I wouldn't trade that for anything. But I think a lot of people, in fact, I think I was talking to someone earlier this week, have this idea of what Genworth is because of its past.
Yeah.
And so, and I think sometimes get defensive on behalf of Genworth of, you're kind of missing it, and this is, if you really are paying attention to where they're going and what they've done and what happened in the past, some of those things. So I'm not going to have you go on over that. Maybe we'll have Jamal on or something to go over the LTC block, in the future. But why don't you tell folks, kind of give the overview of Genworth today and Care Scout?
Yeah, happy to do so. And I will maybe give a little bit of backdrop there, and
Perfect.
30 seconds, minute or less. Yeah. Well, and I joined here in July of 2008, and of course the whole bottom fell out in much of the financial world just a few months later. So when I joined, we were just a little 3 years removed from our IPO from GE, and coincidentally, we're creeping up. Next month is 20 years, which is hard to believe. But when I joined, Genworth then tried to operate almost like a mini GE in some respects. We had probably 8 or 10 different businesses across the U.S. and internationally. We were across a half a dozen different insurance lines. We had wealth management businesses, and we were this huge kind of shared services entity here in Richmond predominantly that was supporting those. And
Yep.
Of course, there's a lot of negatives about the financial crisis in '08 and beyond. But I think one of the positives is it kind of forced us to look in the mirror and recognize which of those businesses were really core to us and where we felt we could be, A players, and which were others
Yeah.
where it really was more legacy stuff from the GE IPO than it was, hey, this is Genworth moving forward. And so as time went on, that's exactly what we did, and shed a lot of those businesses. All of our life business kind of started to grow. The mortgage business started to grow quite a bit as well. Of course, a few years ago, the mortgage business did its own minority IPO and rebranded as Enact. But
Right.
it really, as you alluded to earlier, we'd spent probably close to a decade trying to really shore up our long-term care reserves, but just in general, shore up our overall balance sheet as a company. And so I all of that stuff were times that were, exciting, challenging, sometimes super frustrating, but yet rewarding from a TA perspective in terms of the roller coaster ride that it was. But it certainly, I think it would be hard for us to be in the position that we're in today, which is super exciting, without kind of having some of that experience of going through what we went through in the past, and lumps and all of where that put us in the value proposition we have marching forward with what is now kind of Genworth Care Scout.
So tell us a little bit about Care Scout, because I think that's going to be a more forward-facing brand as we kind of go into it. But I love to kind of have you give an overview of Care Scout as well, and then I think I'm already creating some additional questions we haven't talked about yet
All
on
good.
some of your experience as a TA leader, because gosh, recruiting talent in that environment that you kind of went through, that's challenging,
It was tough.
but very, like you
It
said,
was tough.
rewarding.
Yeah. So Care Scout's been an entity for over 30 years, and Genworth acquired. It's been under the Genworth umbrella for 12 or 13 of those years. But really, what they've been doing as a business historically is just a real small portion of how we're taking that as a growth model, um, moving forward. So specifically, a couple of different components of what the Care Scout brand more or less represents is, within Care Scout, we're building a services model, if you will, and the intention of that is to really help facilitate a more dignified and connected aging journey for folks out there, with particular products, services, et cetera, that are going to
Hmm.
serve the caregiver and person requiring care in mind. Uh,
Sure.
Certainly somewhat aspirational, but we hope that we have a goal, at least, that one day to be kind of a household name for the aging population and their families, to be viewed as a customer centric, digitally powered experience that supports people to have a more vibrant aging experience, and certainly the peace of mind around some of the solutions that they need when they're in that type of challenge. And so, really, specifically, one of the things that we're really working to do is to more or less build an ecosystem where caregivers and their loved ones can learn about care options. Uh, they can learn about plans to fund some of those care options. They can select quality, well vetted care providers that can help manage their care. So that's a huge portion of what we're doing on the services side. But we also know that the fundamentals of long term care are good, and there's an enormous and growing market need for long term care insurance, of course, with the ever growing cost of care.
Right.
Um, and so we also have plans in the works to try to reclaim our position in the market for LTC funding solutions, as we
Love it.
also roll out a Care Scout insurance business. So it'll be products,
That's
again, that are similar to the Genworth name and underwritten largely by Genworth, but under the Care Scout banner with Care Scout branding, and trying to create more of a suite of experiences for people in need.
that's awesome. I love it. I'm so excited for where you guys are headed. again, being there for those 3 years and just kind of understanding a little bit of the strategy and the story. But it's like your guys' CEO, Tom McInerney, has been talking about this. This has been his vision for a really long time. I know when I was doing all my research, I was working with you when I was a candidate, and we're working with you and your team. I was headhunted, of course, I guess, to come there and doing all the research. And you could go through the press releases, you go through the quarterly conference calls with the investors, and Mr. McInerney, Tom, he was talking about this and this network and preferred provider model for years. And so just, I mean, talking about a vision to execution, I'm not sure there's a better one of recent past in the insurance industry, at least right that I
Yeah,
know of
it's
right
been a
now.
long time coming, Shawn. You're right
For
about it.
sure.
And I think where we hope we can be competitive from a business standpoint is that there are there are certainly providers out there, or I should say, organizations such as us that do some of this piecemeal, but there's
Sure.
really not kind of the wing to wing, and there's not
Yeah.
one that is as focused on the quality and transparency around the provider network as we are.
Yeah.
When I mention provider network, the goal is not to shove as many providers as we can into the platform in any given market. It's to we have a pretty tall credentialing process so that
Yeah.
we know that when folks see a provider in that network, they recognize and in full transparency that they're in, those providers are in it for the right reasons. And, certainly that carries a lot of value to the consumer.
It's massive. It's very exciting. So let's kind of go into you've been in the talent acquisition for some amount of time. You've seen a lot of changes. You started on the agency side, banking, now insurance, financial services, and then this whole new um, world is kind of opening up with Care Scout. What what have you seen change and evolve over the years? And you can even talk about some of the things that went through with the Genworth challenges of the past and then to the future. But I'm just kind of curious from your side as a talent acquisition leader, what you've seen kind of evolve and change over the years.
Yeah, I mean, of course, there's a lot of things to choose from. I think one of the probably most obvious one is just technology, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I think about the evolution of technology as a whole, and of course, technology continues to impact each one of us in our daily lives, personally and professionally. And when I first started recruiting, I was so proud of my shiny new flip phone, and now we're talking about artificial intelligence. So that
Right.
that entire evolution has really, of course, impacted the skills and competencies that talent possesses, but it also greatly impacts the way in which you go after that talent, and whether that's branding, or how you source and connect with candidates, or how recruiters use technology to make informed decisions. That's certainly a huge change, I believe. I also, it seems to me over the course of my career that recruiting has become a more of a team sport, right? The
Yeah.
role of recruiter in the entire TA organization has changed considerably, and certainly that of the hiring manager too. Like, those worlds aren't as siloed as they once were, and certainly, you know, I think traditionally the hiring manager probably wasn't expected to do a whole lot in that process. If they had a corporate recruiter supporting them, then their role was primarily the interviewer and the improver, and the recruiter was charged with, here's a hole, fill the hole. But
Right.
now, we expect recruiters to be consultants and talent advisors and influencers on strategy and culture, and engaging folks kind of cross functionally and externally too, right? On uh, for the collective good of what that company's recruiting efforts may ultimately be. And with hiring managers, I mean, we now expect hiring managers to be involved in planning way before recruiting, and doing outreach. And some of that recruiting themselves,
Yeah.
and building opportunistic pipelines. And so it's just it's I for one, I love that change maybe more than any. And I'm certainly grateful that certainly here at Genworth that there's a culture where we place value
Yeah.
on recruiting and TA as a whole, and having a seat at the table to help with solving for business solutions. That talent solutions are just as much an important part of that.
It's really well said. Yeah, having now the TA, the team, and the recruiters, like you have, it's a seat at the table, and also they're like there's this not demand, but you've got to know way more about the business. It seems like than before of just shepherding resumes or applications and that piece. Like there's so much business acumen that is now part of that role. So and you guys do it extremely well. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to this episode of Growth and Diversity Podcast. I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Mostra Coffee. That's MOSTRACOFFEE.com. Go to mostracoffee.com. Check out this woman, minority, veteran, immigrant owned micro coffee roaster out of North County, San Diego. They have amazing coffee. We're addicted to it. We've been drinking it for years in our house, and I hope you get to enjoy it in yours. There's a coupon code as being a part of the Growth and Diversity Podcast listening audience. You can enter Brown Davis 10 and the coupon code once you go to checkout, and you'll receive 10% off.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd also add, Sean, I think candidate expectations have changed, quite a bit too, right? Like, um, really long gone are the days of employers being able to just kind of succeed with a mindset of just selling the merits of the job itself, and
Yeah.
offering a competitive salary, right? Like, folks are expecting much more in terms of extensive benefits to serve them individually as well as their families. I mean, they expect, in a lot of cases these days, like the possibility of um, remote work, and so I just think that it's a challenge in order to compete for top talent, that treating candidates and employees equitably doesn't necessarily mean treating them the same, right? And
Yeah.
so,
That's
depending upon the job, the industry, um, the reality is, some folks demand to earn more than others, and some need to
yep.
work on site and some need to work off site. And so, that's a huge change I think that we've seen, is that organizations need to continue to evolve and think about how they're creating policies, and branding themselves and communicating, and acting in ways that are flexible and treat employees fairly, but are doing so in a way that they're able to still attract talent, because the behaviors amongst that talent vary quite a bit.
It's really well said. That's a great points for takeaway. I think for any executive out there that's got a TA partner, I think you just shared some really strong knowledge there to use in your talent process. So that was really well said. One of the things I definitely wanted to chat with you about, because you and I, when we were having dinner, we were talking about diversity, diverse candidate pools, and you talked about some of the military and veteran efforts that you guys have underway and are kind of working on, which I think is just an enormous opportunity. I'm not a veteran myself. My dad is super passionate about it. Love the military and how we can help those folks kind of come back into the work world. We, Tell us about what you guys are doing, and I think you are doing a lot of that effort, kind of leading the way.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad that you asked about it. I mean, candidly, over the years, we were kind of hit or miss, frankly, at best, really, in creating a welcoming culture and having any um, intentional strategy or opening
Yeah,
opportunities for folks, whether they were, longer, that had been veterans for a period of years, whether they were immediately right then and there transitioning from the military, or reservists, or even military spouses. And so, there's, I think the numbers, like, there's roughly like 250,000 people each year that transition out of the military. So from a very selfish standpoint, that's an enormous talent pool that we just, frankly, as a TA team, weren't tapping into. Um, but also intrinsically, it's the right thing to do, right? I mean,
Right.
I don't know anyone that doesn't place value in the service that these men and women provide to us as a country, and to us as individuals. So to be able to help them once they're going through that transition, just in and of itself, regardless of how robust that talent pool is extremely rewarding. And so, we recognize also that a lot of other organizations who were successful in recruiting that were not focusing maybe as hard in a lot of ways as we had traditionally, with some roles on experience, kind of been there, done that, but
Yep.
more recruiting skills and competencies, knowing that once other skills and competencies were developed, those ones that those veterans were walking in the door carrying were going to be kind of make them even that much more impactful and beneficial to the organization. So we've created a very intentional strategy that has a lot of different prongs to it. I mean, first and foremost, we gain support from senior leadership, from DNI, from our military employee resource group, from talent development, HR business partners, like all of these different stakeholders.
Yep.
We've been very intentional, and not just branding, but kind of fixing, if you will, those things that we knew we needed to do as an organization to truly be a warm and welcoming employer to those in that population. And a lot of it, frankly, Shawn, was internally, like educating hiring managers and others on the value proposition, and building awareness of those skills. And
Yep.
a lot of that is debunking myths and stereotypes of that workforce. Um,
Oh, great.
More specifically, we've made military talent pools like a component of every single search process, if at all
Yep.
possible. Um, we've been very intentional about a lot of the third parties that we've worked with, whether it's more consultative, or specifically getting us access to those candidates. And so, probably the best example of that is we've recently kicked off a great fellowship program, and the program is called Skill Bridge. It's through the Department of Defense, but we've gotten extensive experience from a tremendous partner called Hiring Our Heroes, and doing just that. And
Okay.
so that program, I want to make sure I get everything right here. That program happens 4 times a year,
Okay.
and it allows transitioning service members to work. Really, it's the last 12 weeks that they have their service obligations, and they spend that first week with the Hiring Our Heroes program, kind of learning some general corporate skills, if you will, and then they spend the next 11 weeks in that fellowship program in the organization. And so
Oh,
um,
really?
it's been, we have our first fellow starting here in a few weeks. I have no doubt it's been a learning process all the way through. It's been great. And I know that is just something that's going to continue to snowball. And so Hiring Our Heroes is, again, we're early in the stage for us, but Hiring Our Heroes
Yep.
has shared with us that all of the folks that they help to place in these fellowships, that over 90% of them end up converting to be full-time employees. So we're really
That's
excited
phenomenal.
about what that ultimately means. And then they also, on top of that, offer a military spouse and caregivers fellowship program too, that we'll likely look to dive into next year. But all things are certainly relative in terms of recruiting volume, and what that means organization to organization. But um, year over year, we went from maybe 2022 prior to what we have tried to implement last year, where we saw a lift that was 5-6 times the number of military hires per quarter that we'd seen in the past. And Q1 of this year is nearly 8 times what we'd seen historically. So It's certainly working, and it's not just bringing more folks into Genworth, but again, it's been extremely impactful. I think not just our team, but for a number of folks internally of how they view talent and how
Yeah.
they're becoming increasingly open minded and aware around more how can we think about skills and competencies that are transferable versus always having to have had that hard experience of been there done that.
That's phenomenal. I can't imagine that hurdle, you know, just that piece to your point. I think that's so significant of just educating the hiring teams, the hiring leaders, and the managers just about that these humans are coming with great skills, experiences, and competencies. It may just not direct line to that product experience or that claims experience or whatever, but there's something there that makes them a very viable candidate,
That's exactly right.
um, and brings a diverse view into the organization that can considerably have a growth factor because it's fresh. Um,
Absolutely.
and so that's man, that's awesome. I can't wait to hear more about like the success of that. So this will be the first one, it sounds like, and then just kind of growing from there.
Yeah,
Kudos to you guys.
we're not letting off the gas, that's for sure.
That's awesome. Um, okay, we hit on a little bit earlier. Tell us a little bit about the remote world. And so, Genworth was, I think, for different reasons during the prior potential merger and acquisition, got ready for remote really well, and then you guys were ready to go remote during the pandemic, uh, better than most, at least the stories that I'm familiar with. But tell me about where you guys are now in your view of that with talent, because I know you're in the office today, but you chose to be in the office today. So give me kind of your feel, both personally and as a TA leader, what that means from your talent acquisition piece.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you're right. I mean, we for the crystal ball that somebody had,
Right.
we'd gone through some exercises as a company that what happened if something occurred, laugh, where we could all none of us could get online and or be in the office, and how would we handle that remotely, and so of course hindsight's 2020, but that allowed us to pivot pretty quickly when COVID did hit and hit us hard, and so um, we did transition, I think, pretty effectively. But I think that the effect of that, not just on our emotional well-being, but more so, I think it radically transitioned how folks think about the organization of work
Yep.
and how work can be done. What are the skill sets that are needed to do certain work, and where it can be done. And while I know a lot of folks have gone back into the office and very enthusiastically done so, it's still, I think the last numbers I saw, right, it's still like 3 or 4 times as many workers in the U.S. work
Yep.
remotely as they did, pre-pandemic. And I'm sure to some extent that effect's going to be here, right, for quite some time. Um, and so I think companies kind of are still figuring out where they're comfortable in having people remote versus hybrid versus in office. We see that trend, as you and I were talking about offline,
Right.
of where most companies are kind of somewhere in that handful of days a week in office. But I think from a recruiting standpoint, it's really allowed candidates to think differently about how and where and when they can best contribute to an organization as well as fulfill their own needs. Right? It's a different give and take on what they want and what they're willing to sacrifice or not, for that their entire life experience. And I mean, we talk about. Um, we've heard work life integration a lot more now than kind of work life balance, right? But I think the challenge with talent is all of us have, over the last few years, not just reorganized and rethought about work, but also home life too, right? Like shared commitment with spouses and partners
Yeah.
and kids and as caregivers and all of these kinds of things, right? And so, um, with all of that said, I think candidates are increasingly thinking about those things, and they're at whatever level they're expecting to have some level of flexibility that we maybe never experienced to that extent prior to the pandemic. But I do think people are warming up more to the coming into the office. It seems to me, and a lot of the candidates that we see out there. Um, that being said, I do feel that the last several years have maybe democratized the job market maybe a little bit more than before.
Yeah.
Pre-pandemic, employers held most of the cards, right? And then in many instances, at least in the corporate world, that shifted kind of maybe to the favor of the candidate in the thick of the pandemic because everybody, to some extent, was remote.
Right.
Now, with a more kind of stabilized market, return to office again in a lot of cases, it's probably shifted a little bit back towards the employer, but the candidate still has a bigger voice than they probably did 5, 10 years ago in a lot of ways.
Yeah, no, I think really good point. I think it's interesting too. Think about on our end, we're updating our CRM, and I think of like, I'm not a lifelong, I guess, recruiter, and so the CRMs that I'm used to are the sales forces of the Genworths of the world and some of those things. And they were doing our demo the other day, just kind of a training session, and they're like, "How do you find candidates?" And the example that they just went to naturally was zip code, and it kind of opened my eyes to the old world. That's how it worked, right? You had your candidate pool, you had your database of the Rolodex, and there wasn't like this free world. Like everyone has access to everyone
Yes,
now.
yes.
But it used to be, well, who's in the zip code, and those are the candidates for Genworth, for XYZ company because they lived around your little nucleus. Now it's wide open, white space, Google search, just and then some roles may need to be relocated or be on site or hybrid, or you can kind of build around that. But yeah, to your point, it democratized the kind of that candidate side and I think the attraction side. So big shift for sure, and I think still to evolve and adapt.
Yeah, there's two sides of that coin, right?
Yep,
The evolution of remote work opens the candidate pool, but it also opens the competition pool, quite a bit
100%.
too.
Good point.
I think a lot of what I see the employers who have come out maybe as some of the strongest winners in the pandemic or out of the pandemic rather are some of those who didn't see talent or don't see talent as a commodity, and they treated employees and candidates with a certain, I guess, respect and certain care for not just their well-being, but how they invested in inclusion and how they invested in development, professional development for those folks. And I think in so doing, that laid the foundation for that to become more organic for those organizations as we've started to get more into whatever is the new normal, right? And Shawn,
Yeah,
better than anybody, candidates are savvy, they're smart, and they can recognize when those pieces of the employee value proposition are intentional and authentic or
yeah,
not, right? So
great point.
it seems to me that those employers that didn't exhibit some of those behaviors are trying to play a little bit of catch up now.
Yeah, no, great. I think great point. All right, I think we're at a good point to wrap this thing up. So I'm going to ask you, why don't you share for the folks kind of where, if they're interested in more about the Genworth story or Care Scout and career opportunities, how should they kind of learn more and research about them? I will throw a little disclosure. We have Chad has given us the ability to partner with them in the past. We love working with this team. So I'm happy to field any questions. I can give you kind of the non-paid disclosed third party my own story, which will be extremely positive on behalf of Genworth and Care Scout. But Chad, tell folks out there kind of where they can learn more about what you guys are doing, especially from a career opportunity standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, of course, there's plenty of information on genworth.com, carescout.com. We're on social media, Glassdoor, LinkedIn, Facebook. I'd say for the holistic kind of story, but with some great details too, it's not even a month old and available to the public on genworth.com is our 2023 sustainability report.
Oh,
And
cool.
that sustainability report, um, certainly details and highlights those kind of ESG related issues
Sure.
as they're important to our business and stakeholders and all of that. But it also goes into quite a bit of detail on our business outlooks and performance and progress and achievements and how all of those different commitments kind of fit in together and what we are doing, not just looking retroactively, but aspire to do moving forward. It also really, I think, gives a good glimpse into some of the great things that we're doing outside of the business. So whether it's around employee well-being or volunteerism in the community, a lot of those different aspects of what is involved in the opportunities that exist in being a Genworth or Care Scout associate. So I think that sustainability report is a great place to start, and then check out
Very
social
cool.
media as time goes on and different more time appropriate happenings occur.
Oh, that's great. No, I appreciate that. I realize I need to give a shout out. If you're wondering what Moster is, just to the audience, this is our sponsor, coffee brand out of California. Check them out. It's delicious. They sent me some swag, so happy to put some Care Scout Genworth. I think I still have some Genworth stuff. I can wear that
We'll get
at
you.
some future
We'll get
point.
you.
But Chad, this has been awesome. I think we could continue going. We probably didn't even hit on all the things that we wanted to hit on, but thanks for joining today. Really enjoyed having you. And thanks everyone for tuning in to this episode of Growth and Diversity for our interview with the head of talent acquisition, our first head of talent acquisition, Chad Caples. Thanks for joining. Everyone have a great day.
Thanks, Shawn.